This is the unsettling story of war criminals who escape justice. Let's start with a name that still sends shivers down the spines of many, Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death. As the chief physician at Auschwitz, Mengele's name became synonymous with the horrors of the Holocaust. He conducted monstrous experiments on prisoners, particularly twins, showing a complete disregard for human life. When the war ended and the Allies closed in, Mengele, the man who decided the fate of hundreds of thousands with a flick of his hand, simply vanished. How did he do it? Using a network of former Nazi sympathizers, often called Ratlins, Mengele managed to escape from Germany. He first went to Austria, then Italy. For a time, he worked as a carpenter. Can you imagine? The man responsible for so much pain, living a simple life. In 1949, he obtained a passport under a false name and sailed to Argentina, a haven for many former Nazis at the time. For years, he lived openly in Buenos Aires, while Israeli intelligence agency Mossad was hunting for high-profile Nazis like Adolf Eichmann. Mengele remained a lower priority. He even felt comfortable enough to use his own name on documents. When Mossad did eventually capture Eichmann in Buenos Aires in 1960, Mengele got spooked. He fled to Paraguay and then to Brazil. Despite international manhunts and a significant bounty on his head, he managed to evade capture for the rest of his life. He wasn't brought down by a commando raid or a courtroom verdict. Instead, in 1979, while swimming off the Brazilian coast, Joseph Mengele suffered a stroke and drowned. He was buried under a false name, and his remains were only identified years later through forensic testing. For 34 years, one of history's most infamous criminals lived free. His escape is a chilling reminder of the failures of post-war justice. But Mengele wasn't the only one. Let's travel to Asia, to the Khmer regime in Cambodia. Between 1975 and 1979, this brutal regime, led by Pol Pot, was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 2 million people, a quarter of the country as population. Their goal was to create a radical agrarian communist society, and they did so through forced labor, starvation, torture, and mass executions in the infamous killing fields. Pol Pot, the architect of this genocide, was brother number one. When the Vietnamese army invaded Cambodia in 1979 and toppled his regime, Pol Pot and his loyal followers retreated to the jungles along the Thai border. From there, they waged a guerrilla war for years. He became a recluse, a shadowy figure rarely seen. While some of his top lieutenants were eventually brought to a UN-backed tribunal, Pol Pot himself never faced an international court. In 1997, he was overthrown by his own faction, subjected to a show trial, and placed under house arrest. The world watched, hoping he would finally be handed over to face true justice. But it never happened. In April 1998, just as the Khmer Rouge remnants were negotiating his surrender to an international tribunal, the news broke. Pol Pot was dead. The official cause was a heart attack. He died in his sleep in a simple jungle hut, never having answered for the genocide he orchestrated. His death left a nation of survivors with a profound sense of unfinished business. Now, let's look at another figure. One whose escape was less about hiding and more about political maneuvering, Ante Pavelic. As the leader of the Ustashi, the fascist movement that ruled the independent state of Croatia, a Nazi puppet state during World War II, Pavelic oversaw a brutal campaign of persecution. His regime was responsible for the systematic murder of hundreds of thousands of Serbs, Jews, and Roma people in concentration camps like Jasenovac, a place infamous for its extreme cruelty. When the war ended, Pavelic, like Mengele, used the Ratlins to escape. Disguised as a priest, he found refuge in Catholic monasteries in Austria and Italy. Astonishingly, he managed to make his way to Argentina in 1948, the same haven that harbored Mengele. He lived there for almost a decade, even serving as a security advisor to President Juan. He wasn't exactly hiding. He lived under his own name, surrounded by his former Ustashi bodyguards. Yugoslavia repeatedly demanded his extradition, but their requests were denied. Justice, it seemed, would have to come from other means. In 1957, Pavelic survived an assassination attempt in Buenos Aires, believed to be the work of Yugoslav security services. Wounded and fearing for his life, he fled Argentina, eventually finding sanctuary in Francisco Franco's Spain. He lived there until his death in 1959 from complications related to his gunshot wounds. Once again, a man responsible for immense suffering died not in a prison cell, but in a hospital bed, shielded by a sympathetic regime. And we can't forget Shiro Ishii, the mastermind behind Japan's infamous Unit 731 during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. Ishii and his unit conducted horrific human experiments in occupied Manchuria. They infected prisoners with diseases like plague and cholera, performed live vivisections without anesthesia, and tested biological and chemical weapons on entire villages. The scale of the cruelty was on par with that of Mengele. So, what happened to Ishii after Japan's surrender? You might expect a swift trial and a harsh sentence. But you'd be wrong. In a stunning and deeply controversial move, the United States authorities secretly granted Shiro Ishii and his top researchers immunity from prosecution for war crimes. In exchange, they handed over their research data on human experimentation and biological warfare. The American government believed this data was too valuable to fall into Soviet hands at the dawn of the Cold War. So, while lower-level members of Unit 731 were tried by the Soviets, the leaders, including the man in charge, walked free. Shiro Ishii never faced a courtroom. He never had to answer for his crimes. He reportedly lived a quiet life in Japan and died of throat cancer in 1959. Justice was traded for intelligence. It's a morally complex and deeply unsettling chapter of post-war history, one that shows how political interests can override the pursuit of accountability. These stories are uncomfortable. They challenge our belief that good ultimately triumphs over evil, and that justice, though it may be slow, is inevitable. The escapes of Mengele, Pol Pot, Pavelic, and Ishii are stark reminders that history is not a fairy tale. They show how networks of sympathizers, political expediency, and sheer luck can allow the perpetrators of the worst crimes imaginable to slip away. Their freedom denied millions of victims and their families the closure they deserved, leaving a permanent stain on the conscience of the world. The lesson here is a sobering one. Justice is not guaranteed. It must be relentlessly pursued or it can be lost forever. Thanks for watching. If you found this documentary thought-provoking, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the darker corners of history. See you next time.